Continuing with the thoughts of this author, who indeed could look with indifference on the prospect of an absolute and eternal separation from all that he has loved? Who, without terror, could behold, yawning beneath him, the bottomless abyss of nothingness, in which all his faculties and aspirations are to be swallowed up forever? Who could calmly say to himself, after my death there will be nothing for me but the void of an annihilation. All will be ended. A few days hence all memory of me will have been blotted out from the remembrance of those who survived me, and the earth itself will retain no trace of my passage. Even the good that I have done will be forgotten by the ungrateful mortals whom I have benefited, and there is nothing to compensate me for all this loss, no other prospect beyond this ruin than that of my body devoured by worms. Is there not something horrible in such a picture, something that sends an icy chill through the heart? Religion teaches us that such cannot be our destiny, and reason confirms the teachings of religion. But the vague, indefinite assurance of a future existence, which is all that is given us either by religion or by reason, cannot satisfy our natural desire for some positive proof in a matter of such paramount importance for us, and it is just the lack of such proof in regard to a future life that in so many cases engenders doubt as to its reality. Admitting that we have a soul, many very naturally ask, what is our soul? Has it a form, an appearance of any kind? Is it limited being? Or is it something undefined and impersonal? Some say that it is a breath of God, others that it is a spark. Others again declare it to be part of the great whole, the principle of life and all intelligence, and of intelligence. But what do we learn from these statements? What is the good of our possessing a soul, if our soul is to be merged in immensity like a drop of water in the ocean? Is not the loss of our individual equivalent, so far as we are concerned, to annihilation? The soul is said to be immaterial, but that which is immaterial can have no defined proportions, and therefore can have no reality for us. Religion also teaches that we shall be happy or unhappy according to the good or the evil we have done. But of what nature are the happiness or unhappiness thus promised us in another life? Is that happiness a state of beatitude in the bosom of God, an external contemplation with no other employment than that of singing the praises of the Creator? And the flames of hell, are they a reality or a figure of speech? The Church itself attributes to them a figurative meaning, but of what nature are the sufferings thus figuratively shadowed forth? And where is the sense of those sufferings? In short, what shall we be? What shall we do? What shall we see in that other world which is said to await us all? No one, it is adhered, has ever come back to give us an account of that world. But this statement is erroneous, and the mission of Spiritism is precisely to enlighten us in regard to the future which awaits us, to enable us, within certain limits, to see and to touch it, not merely as a deduction of our reasons, but through the evidence of facts, thanks to the communications made to us by the people of that other world. The latter is no longer a mere presumption, a probability, which each one pictures to himself according to his own fancy, which poets embellish with fictitious and allegorical images that serve only to deceive us. Is that other world itself, in its reality, which is now brought before us, for it is the beings of the life beyond the grave who come to us, who describe to us the situations in which they find themselves, who tell us what they are doing, who allow us to become, so to say, the spectators of the details of their new order of life, and who thus show us the inevitable fate which is reserved for each of us according to our merits or our misdeeds. Is there anything anti-religious in such a demonstration? Assuredly not, since it furnishes unbelievers with a ground of belief, and inspires lukewarm believers with renewed fervor and confidence. Spiritism is thus seen to be the most powerful auxiliary of religion, and if it be such, it must be acknowledged to exist by the permission of God, for the purpose of giving new strength to our wavering convictions, and thus of leading us back into the right road by the prospect of our future happiness. Okay, another chapter. Return from the corporeal to the spirit life. The soul after death, its individuality, eternal life, separation of soul and body, temporarily confused state of the soul after death. The soul after death questions. Question: what becomes of the soul at the moment of death? Answer: it becomes again a spirit, that is to say, it returns into the world of spirits which it has quitted for a short time. Question: does the soul after death preserve its individuality? Answer: yes, it never loses its individuality. What would the soul be if it did not preserve it? Question: how does the soul preserve the consciousness of its individuality, since it no longer has its material body? Answer: it still has a fluid peculiar to itself, which it draws from the atmosphere of its planet, and which represents the appearance of its last incarnation, its perispirit. Question: does the soul take nothing of this life away with it? Answer: nothing but the resemblance of that life and the desire to go to a better world. This remembrance is full of sweetness or of bitterness according to the use it has made of the earthly life it has quitted. The more advanced is the degree of its purification, the more clearly does it perceive the futility of all that it has left behind it upon the earth. Question: what is to be thought of the opinion that the soul after death returns to the universal whole? Answer: does not the mass of spirits, considered in its totality, constitute a whole? Does it not constitute a world? When you are in an assembly, you form an integral part of that assembly, and yet you still retain your individuality. Question: what proof can we have of the individuality of the soul after death? Answer: if not this proof furnished by the communications which you obtain. If you were not blind, you would see. If you were not deaf, you would hear. For you are often spoken to by a voice which reveals to you the existence of a being exterior to yourself. And these are the author's words. Those who think that the soul returns after death into the universal whole are in error if they imagine that it loses its individuality, like a drop of water that falls into the ocean. They are right if they mean by the universal whole the totality of incorporeal beings, of which each soul or spirit is an element. If souls were blended together into a mass, they would possess only the qualities common to the totality of the mass. There would be nothing to distinguish them from one another, and they would have no special intellectual or moral qualities of their own. But the communications we obtain from spirits give abundant evidence of the possession by each spirit of the consciousness of theme and of a distinct will, personal to itself. The infinite diversity of characteristics of all kinds presented by them is at once the consequence and the evidence of their distinctive personal individuality. If after death there were nothing but what is called the great whole, absorbing all individualities, this whole would be uniform in its characteristics, and in that case all the communications received from the invisible world would be identical. But as among the denizens of that other world we meet with some who are good and some who are bad, some who are learned and some who are ignorant, some who are happy and some who are unhappy, and as they present us with every shade of character, some being frivolous and others serious, it is evident that they are different individualities, perfectly distinct from one another. This individuality becomes still more evident when they are able to prove their identity by unmistakable tokens, by personal details relating to their terrestrial life, and susceptible to being verified. And it cannot be a matter of doubt when they manifest themselves to our sight under the form of apparitions. The individuality of the soul has been taught theoretically as an article of faith. Spiritism renders it patent as an evident and, so to say, a material fact. Okay, now a question. In what sense should we understand eternal life? Answer. It is the life of the spirit that is eternal. That of the body is transitory and fleeting. When the body dies, the soul re-enters the eternal life. Question. Would it not be more correct to apply the term eternal life to the life of the purified spirits, of those who, having attained to the degree of relative perfection, have no longer to undergo the discipline of suffering? Answer. The life of that degree might rather be termed eternal happiness, but this is a question of words. You may call things as you please, provided you are agreed among yourselves as to your meanings. This question is separation of soul and body. Is the separation of the soul from the body a painful process? Answer. No, the body often suffers more during life than at the moment of death, when the soul is usually unconscious of what is occurring to the body. The sensations experienced at the moment of death are often a source of enjoyment for the spirit, who recognizes them as putting an end to the term of its exile. I think I would feel that way. Author's words. In cases of natural death, where dissolution occurs as a consequence of the exhaustion of the bodily organs through age, man passes out of life without perceiving that he is doing so. It is like the flame of a lamp that goes out for want of aliment. Question. How is the separation of soul and body effected? Answer. The bonds which retain the soul being broken, it disengages itself from the body. Question. Is this separation effected instantaneously and by means of an abrupt transition? Is there any distinctly marked line of demarcation between life and death? Answer. No. The soul disengages itself gradually. It does not escape at once from the body like a bird whose cage is suddenly opened. The two states touch and run into each other, and the spirit extricates himself little by little from his fleshly bonds, which are loosed but not broken. And these are the author's words. During life, a spirit is held to the body by his semi-material envelope, or perispirit. Death is the destruction of the body only, but not of this second envelope, which separates itself from the body when the play of organic life ceases in the latter. The observation shows us that the separation of this perispirit from the body is not suddenly completed at the moment of death, but is only effected gradually and more or less slowly in different individuals. In some cases, it is effected so quickly that the perispirit is entirely separated from the body within a few hours of the death of the latter, but in other cases, and especially in the case of those whose life has been grossly material and sensual, this deliverance is much less rapid, and sometimes takes days, weeks, and even months for its accomplishment. This delay does not imply the slightest persistence of vitality in the body, nor any possibility of its return to life, but is simply the result of a certain affinity between the body and the spirit, which affinity is always more or less tenacious in proportion to the preponderance of materiality in the affections of the spirit during his earthly life. It is, in fact, only rational to suppose that the more closely a spirit has identified himself with matter, the greater will be his difficulty in separating himself from his material body. While, on the contrary, intellectual and moral activity and habitual elevation of thought effect a commencement of this separation even during the life of the body, and therefore when death occurs, the separation is almost instantaneous. The study of a great number of individuals after their death has shown that affinity which, in some cases, continues to exist between the soul and the body is sometimes extremely painful, for it causes the spirit to perceive all the horrors of the decomposition of the latter. This experience is exceptional and peculiar to certain kinds of life and to certain kinds of death. It sometimes occurs in the case of those who have committed suicide. Next question. Can the definitive separation of the soul and body take place before the complete cessation of organic life? Answer. It sometimes happens that the soul has quitted the body before the last agony comes on, so that the latter is only the closing act of merely organic life. The dying man has no longer any consciousness of himself, and nevertheless there still remains in him a faint breathing of vitality. The body is a machine that is kept in movement by the heart. It continues to live as long as the heart causes the blood to circulate in the veins, and has no need of the soul to do that. Question. Does the soul sometimes at the moment of death experience an aspiration or an ecstasy that gives it a foreglimpse of the world into which it is about to return? Answer. The soul often feels the loosening of the bonds that attach it to the body, and does its utmost to hasten and complete the work of separation. Already partially freed from matter, it beholds the future unrolled before it, and enjoys, in anticipation, the spirit state upon which it is about to re-enter.